All right, let's talk about a tax that you'll find on receipts in over 170 countries, but it's still a total mystery to a lot of people, especially if you're from the United States. It's called VAT, and I promise, by the end of this, you are going to get it completely. So, picture this. You're on an amazing vacation. You buy a cool souvenir, and then you look at the receipt, and you see this weird three-letter acronym, VAT, tacked onto your bill. What on earth is that? A tip? Some kind of local fee? Well, nope. You've just paid one of the most common taxes in the entire world.
So what is it exactly? VAT stands for value-added tax. Now, unlike a sales tax that just gets slapped down at the very end when you buy something, VAT is a consumption tax that's collected at every single stage of the supply chain. And the really important part to remember is in the name. It's a tax on the value that gets added at each step.
To really wrap your head around this, the best way is to just follow the journey of something simple. How about a loaf of bread? We're going to use a nice round 10% VAT rate to make the math easy. This little story is going to make everything click. You'll see.
Okay, so it all starts with the farmer, right? The farmer grows some wheat and sells it to a baker for 40 bucks. On top of that price, the farmer charges $4 in VAT, making the total bill $44. Then, the farmer takes that $4 and sends it straight to the government. Simple enough.
Now here's where the real magic of the VAT system kicks in. The baker buys that wheat for $44, which includes the $4 of VAT. They work their magic, turn it into bread, and sell it to a retail shop for $100. Now they have to charge 10% VAT, so that's another $10. But, and this is the key, does the baker send that whole $10 to the government? Nope. They get a credit for the $4 in VAT they already paid on the wheat, so they only send the difference, which is $6.
Let's take it to the final step. The retailer buys the bread from the baker for $110, which includes that $10 of VAT. Then they put it on the shelf and sell it to you, the customer, for $150 plus $15 in VAT. And just like the baker, the retailer gets a credit for the VAT they already paid. So they only send $5 to the government. That's the $15 they collected from you, minus the $10 they paid to the baker.
And boom, there it is. This shows you the whole mechanism perfectly. Just look at the total amount the government got. They got $4 from the farmer, $6 from the baker, and $5 from the retailer. You add that all up, and you get $15. And what's $15? It's exactly 10% of the final $150 price that you paid. So you see, the tax was collected in little pieces along the way, but the entire cost ultimately falls on the final consumer.
So you might be thinking, this sounds kind of like a sales tax. Well, you're not wrong, but there are some huge differences. Let's put them side by side and see how they really stack up. Really, the single biggest difference comes down to timing. VAT is collected in fractions, piece by piece, all throughout the production process. A retail sales tax, on the other hand, is a one-shot deal. It's collected all at once, only at the very final point of sale to the consumer.
With a VAT system, every business in the chain is sending a little piece of the tax to the government, and it's all tracked through invoices. This creates this awesome self-policing paper trail that makes it way, way harder to cheat the system. A sales tax, though, relies completely on that final retailer to collect and remit everything. That's kind of like a single point of failure. Oh, and it's also worth pointing out that VAT tends to cover services way more broadly than most sales tax systems do.
Okay, so now that we get how it works, let's zoom out a bit. Just how common is this system really? The answer might actually surprise you. Get this, over 170 countries use a VAT, or a system that's almost identical, sometimes called a GST. We're talking Europe, Asia, Africa, South America. It is pretty much the dominant form of taxation across the globe. The United States is really the big exception among developed countries, mostly because we have this really long-established system of state and local sales taxes, which makes a big national switch politically, well, complicated.
And the rates themselves, they are all over the map. You've got places like Hungary with a whopping 27% standard rate. The average across the European Union is around 21%. But then you have countries like Switzerland with a much lower rate, closer to 8%. This huge variation usually reflects different ideas about government spending and the size of social safety nets. It really shows how flexible this tax can be.
All right, so with that many countries using it, there have to be some pretty powerful reasons why, right? But what are the actual economic pros and cons? Is VAT actually a good tax?
Well, the biggest arguments in its favor are its efficiency and its raw power. It's a massive revenue generator. And like we saw, that invoice system makes it really tough to evade. It's also basically neutral for businesses, since they always get to credit the tax they pay on their inputs. Plus, it's a huge boost for international trade.
Exports are usually zero-rated, which just means any VAT paid is fully refunded, making a country's products cheaper and more competitive on the global market.
But it is definitely not perfect. For businesses, especially the small ones, keeping track of all those records can be a major administrative pain. The most serious criticism, though, is that it can be regressive. Think about it. Lower-income families spend a much bigger chunk of their money on necessities. So a flat tax on everything you buy takes a much bigger bite out of their budget compared to wealthier families.
Let's tackle some of the big questions people have about how this works in the real world. First up, does a VAT actually make the market work better? Does it help get rid of products that people don't really want?
And the answer is, yeah, pretty much. Because the tax doesn't distort things for businesses. The final price you see on the shelf really reflects the true cost of making something, plus the tax. That means you, the consumer, become the ultimate judge. If a product isn't worth its full taxed price to you, you're just not going to buy it. This lets consumer demand, not weird tax rules, decide what succeeds and what fails.
Okay, what about investment? Since VAT is a tax on spending, could it accidentally stop businesses from making those big, long-term bets on things like new technology or research and development?
Not really. In fact, you could argue it's way friendlier to investment than something like a corporate income tax. When a company buys a giant new machine or invests in R&D, it gets to immediately claim a credit for any VAT it paid on that purchase. It's a tax on what's sold, not a tax on the investments that create growth down the road.
And now for the big one. We touched on this already, that it can be regressive. So let's just ask it straight up. Doesn't this kind of tax just hurt the poor?
That is a very real, very serious concern. And countries that use VAT have come up with ways to deal with it. A common strategy is to apply a lower tax rate or even a zero rate on essential things like basic food, medicine, or kids' clothes. But maybe even more importantly, the huge amount of revenue that VAT brings in can be used to fund social programs that are specifically targeted to help low-income households, like direct cash assistance or food support.
This quote really just sums up the whole economic argument for VAT perfectly. When it's designed well, it interferes with the economy as little as possible. It raises the money governments need, but it lets us, the consumers and competition, do the hard work of driving an efficient market.
So, I'll leave you with this final thought. Now that you know the mechanics, the pros and the cons, which system makes more sense to you? A system that taxes what people spend, or a system that taxes what people earn? It's a question that sits right at the very heart of tax policy debates all over the world.